Good afternoon. I welcome you all at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, at the Press Center, our regular briefing. We begin with the schedule of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov. On February the 7th in Moscow, he will hold a meeting with the heads of committees of parliaments of the CSTO member states. In their agenda is included the issues of international relations, defense, and security. This is what the meeting will be dedicated to. They plan to discuss the development of interparliamentary cooperation within the organization, the perfection of the action of the Parliamentary Assembly of the CSTO, as well as the realizing of the decisions of the session of the Collective Security Council, which took place on November 28, 2024 in Astana, as well as the exchange of opinions on the relevant issues of the international and regional agenda. As well as for the schedule, I would like to point out, as you know, on January 30th, and the Republic of Vietnam celebrated 75 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations. We spoke about it at length 2 weeks ago during the briefing. And today I would like to note that on February 11th, the MFA will open the exhibition dedicated to this date in our bilateral relations, and the ceremony will be attended by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov. We invite journalists to participate in this event. You can follow the live stream, as always. It will be posted on social media, on the accounts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we are always open to this. Another event as well, on the 11th of February, Minister of Foreign Affairs received the General Secretary on the measures of trust in Asia, who will visit Moscow with a working visit. And I would like to remind you that this is a multilateral dialogue platform which advocates for the promotion of practical cooperation on a wide range of issues of joint cooperation. And today this organization counts 28 states from different geographical zones, from the Northern Africa to Middle East, as well as the Middle Asia. And since December of last year, the chairmanship is held by Azerbaijan. The agenda oversees the discussion of key aspects of the work of the organizations, with perspectives of future evolution as one of the key elements of the cooperational architecture of the Grand Eurasia. On February 13th, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Tajikistan will visit our country with an official visit, and will have his talks with his counterparts, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs will discuss the realization of agreements on reinforcing allyship, as well as the strategic partnership of Russia and Tajikistan. And in the context of future joint work on promoting the whole complex of Russia and Tajikistan ties, they will discuss the schedule of the interstate dialogue in the upcoming year. They will have a detailed, substantial exchange of opinions on key issues of bilateral agenda, with a special attention paid to the reinforcement of cooperation in the issues of security and defense, as well as humanitarian and migrational areas. They will discuss regional topical issues of the global agenda in order to deepen the coordination between Moscow and Dushanbe, as well as on the multilateral platforms as the UN, CIS, CSTO, and SCO. During the visit, they will sign a range of bilateral documents, including the program of cooperation between our Ministers of Foreign Affairs for 2025-2026. One date from the schedule of the minister, I saved it for last, and here I mean the February the 10th, our professional holiday, the Diplomat's Day, which was established by the President on the 31st of October. And of course, we will all congratulate each other on this day. And of course, for this day, this is a working day. For all of those who work in the central office of the ministry, we have a lot of events planned for this day. But allow me to recall the history. February the 10th of 1549, this day is connected with the earliest documented mention of the ambassadorial decree, which was the first state department which took care of foreign affairs. Of course, we shortened the name to the Diplomat's Day, but it's actually the holiday of all those who work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who work in diplomatic missions, in our regional missions. And this day is dedicated to preserving traditions of the diplomatic service. And this is the symbol of our unity, of our actions. And this is a perfect occasion to share information about the achievements, both historic and diplomatic, of our country during the difficult situation nowadays. Diplomats are carrying extra responsibility to defend the interests of Russia on the foreign perimeter or in the foreign affairs, which we hear more often. And this is a responsibility that is held. Of course, the diplomatic service is part of the state service. But this responsibility is also connected to the hopes and aspirations of people who not only put their responsibility onto the diplomats, but also their hope and aspirations that the current crisis will be overcome, but also that these expectations connected with the work of diplomats will be fulfilled. And as you know, we always do everything we can and everything possible in order to ensure security of our country, to enlarge mutually beneficial cooperation with the states of Eurasia, Africa, and Latin America. And we're doing everything we can so that the planet can withstand the pressure from different regimes, political spheres of madness. As per tradition, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in both our embassies, there will be a lot of celebratory events. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation will hold a number of events with participation of the minister. On the morning of February the 10th, the minister will hold the wreath ceremony next to the plaques of the diplomats who paid with their lives both during the Great Patriotic War. We will lay the flowers to the monument of Yevgeny Primakov, which is located on the square in front of the ministry. We'll attend the Novodevichy Cemetery, and in the foyer there will be an exhibition dedicated to the 80 years since the opening of the Yalta Conference, which took place in 1945. We spoke about this at length, about this historical event, and about the importance of the decision that were taken during this conference during our last briefing, and also this appeared in many documents, interviews, and materials of Russian ambassadors, Russian diplomats, and the key spot should be dedicated to the article of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, who published this article just ahead of this historical event. And in the afternoon, during the ceremonial gathering, the minister will address his colleagues, and there is a special section on our website which is traditionally dedicated to the Diplomat's Day. Ahead of the professional holiday, we publish different interviews, articles of our ambassadors, permanent representatives, general consulates. And ahead of the Diplomat's Day, we traditionally publish a lot of materials dedicated to our history, to the history of diplomatic service, and to keys and goals that we set for ourselves and how they're being implemented. And in order to honor the memory, there will be a hashtag that collects the most relevant events Traditionally, under this hashtag, we pay honors to the memories of everyone who served our country. We remember them with gratitude, and all these materials can be found on our accounts and social media under the hashtag Diplomats Day or the DDR 2025. We will share all this information in the text of today's briefing, so please follow our social media and the timeline of news that we're posting there. And in the context of honoring the memories of those who have, I have to mention that unfortunately today we found out that today we've lost the first deputy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Vladimir, who held this position since 2013 to 2024. Just recently, perhaps within the last hour, we've posted the necrologue, and his memory will stay in the hearts of his colleagues and friends, and we express sincere condolences to his family and friends. And now for the relevant international agenda. Of course, we start with the situation around Ukraine. Ukrainian militants continue to terrorize the civilian population and civilian infrastructure of Russian regions. On January 29th, 30th, the Ukrainian armed forces have fired more than 30 shells, including cluster munitions. They targeted a dormitory quarter of Kremenaya, the LPR. 2 people were injured. Residential houses and social facilities were destroyed on January 31st, from January 31st to February 3rd. Massive shelling and drone attacks were launched against Gorlovka. 30 people were wounded. 2 hospitals, an oncology dispensary, as well as a maternal and child welfare center were damaged. The Benderites do not stop hunting civilians in Kursk region, including with the help of UAVs. On January 30th, 2 civilians were wounded when a shell hit a residential house in the village of Voronok in Rilsky district. On January 31st, in the village of Snagost, Kornevsky district, an enemy drone hit a civilian vehicle. 2 people were killed and 1 wounded. On the same day, in the liberated village of Nikolaeva Daryina, Suzhin district, a drone wounded 3 local residents when Russian servicemen were taking them out of a cellar where they tried to hide from Ukraine Nazis. On January 29th, in Belgorod region, in the village of Razumne, after a drone hit a residential house, a woman and her 2-year-old child were killed. From January 31st to February 3rd, as a result of a UAV attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on civilian vehicles, as well as the settlements in the region. As a result of this attack, 2 civilians were killed and 12 people were wounded. On January 31st, on the Vasilievska-Tomak highway in Zaporozhye region, a Ukrainian drone attacked a civilian car, and a local resident died of his wounds. On February the 4th, in Vasilyevka municipality of the same region, the Benderites used a drone to attack a school bus carrying 20 minors and their chaperone. Five children and the driver were injured. Is this really the first case when the Ukrainian armed forces deliberately target children? Of course not. Far from it. And this is not a singular case amongst many. This is a tactic, and this is a strategy that is at the basis of their actions. Because this is what the Kyiv regime's politics was counting on, to do anything so that there are no more people who did not bend the knee to the Ukraine Nazis, to the band who continue to destroy the motherland of Ukrainians in order to scare them off, in order to hit exactly where it hurts, to target their children. The Kyiv regime chose this method specifically. There's nothing human, not even holy, just human, exists for the Kiev regime and its bloody executioners. And I would like to remind you that everything, and Zelensky admitted to it just recently, all of this is possible only thanks to the support from the West, thanks to the financial pumping and the supply of arms coming in daily. But every crime is followed by the punishment. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes. Russian investigative committee has chosen preventive measures for Ukrainian armed forces fighters, Fabrisenko and Parafilo, who committed atrocities towards civilians in the village of Ruskaya Porechnya in Kursk region. Those are not even crimes. Yes, this is the official qualification, the crime, the violation of the law. And why are the lawyers saying that? They should closely follow the letter and the spirit of the law. They have no right to take a step to the right or to the left from the letter and the spirit of the law. But if we use the words who describe not only the legal side of these crimes, but if we mention the basis, these are the atrocities. The defendants pleaded guilty. Lithuanian mercenary Remus Armaitis was sentenced in absentia to 12.5 years of imprisonment, while Georgian so-called legionnaire Georgi Gelashvili was sentenced to 14 years. All those convicted are on an international wanted list. The criminal cases of the British mercenary James Scott, who was taken prisoner, and the wanted Georgian mercenaries Mikhail Gognadze, Gelahor Sevanidze, and Kukury Barmidze have been sent to court for the attack on the Russian embassy in Kiev on March 10, 2016. A citizen of Ukraine, Ermakrat, was sentenced in absentia for 7 years in prison. Back in the day, I'd like to remind you, she, together with 2 unidentified persons, threw 6 Molotov cocktails on the territory of our diplomatic mission. The law enforcement agencies of Russia will continue to work to bring Ukraine Nazis and foreign mercenaries to justice for war and other crimes. And as for the Western assistance that serves as the substance feeding the terrorist Kiev regime, Western countries are trying to prevent the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. In other words, they're doing everything in order to continue killings of civilians. On February the 1st, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte lamented in an interview with Bild that, direct quote, "the front is moving in the wrong direction." I believe that the NATO Secretary General, it's a word that speaks for itself, who urged Europeans to increase defense spending to make sure, as he said, Russia does not achieve its goals. Can you believe it? According to him, the front is moving in the wrong direction. On February the 3rd, French President Emmanuel Macron promised to double the country's defense budget. On January 31st, Ukrainian Prime Minister Shumgal announced that under the agreement on so-called 100-year partnership with the UK, Kyiv expects to receive £2.5 billion from London for the purchase of air defense systems and the creation of repair bases for Western military equipment in the country. I have 2 amendments to his statement. Why the 100-year partnership agreement was reached with the UK, I listened to the statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the United Kingdom, if we can use this word in this case, and found out that apparently, as was stated by the British side, a direct quote, the British-Ukrainian partnership goes back thousands of years. So that's what they should have called it. To count the future by thousands of years, why being so modest and calling a 100-year partnership? It's an atrocious, and not even a mistake or an incorrectly expressed thought. It's just an atrocity of thought based on total lack of knowledge of history, not only of Ukraine, but now I'm sure that the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the UK doesn't even know the history of their own country if they know that their relationship has been built over thousands of years, according to him. And the Second Amendment to what he has been discussing, London is planning to hand over to the Kiev regime £2.5 billion. You see, based on what we've witnessed in 2020, the healthcare system in the UK, maybe even if it does exist, it's only available for those with great opportunities. And the rest of them, who represent the majority of the UK, have to provide healthcare services by themselves because they're either unavailable or they don't even exist as a whole. This is the healthcare systems. Do you remember how they were treated on the phone from COVID? When they called, said that they had a fever of 40 degrees, they were unable to breathe, they had no medication, and they could either not leave their houses or they were prohibited, and they were instructed over the phone, and the rest you can remember. Perhaps these £2.5 billion for London should be spent on the development of their own healthcare system. Just recently, the whole world watched in horror as Los Angeles went up in flames, as California went up in flames. And it goes up in flames every year, but this year it fully burned down. And it did not spare a single soul, no matter if they were rich or poor. And it only demonstrated to the whole world that a state in the United States, an entire state, was not prepared to extinguish the fires, to preventive measures. It seemed that the money for extinguishing the fires, especially through official American structures, were not transferred to the states in need, but to the Kiev regime, including in order to the needs of fire extinguishment.
Штат США. Вот у меня вопрос к Британии. 2,5 миллиарда фунтов стерлингов. Какое количество британцев мечтали бы быть причастными к этим деньгам просто для того, чтобы элементарно поправить свое здоровье? Зачем же вы, Даунинг-стрит, Foreign Office, отправляете эти деньги не на лечение своих людей, а на смерть чужих? Тоже просто бизнес. Вот на днях Швеция анонсировала выделение рекордного транша помощи ВСУ на сумму 1,2 миллиарда долларов. Тоже, видимо, социальных вопросов нет и проблем в Швеции, а все же знают, что есть. При этом неконтролируемая накачка Украины оружием способствует росту, и они же тоже об этом не думают, контрабанды вооружений за пределы Украины. Сколько можно об этом говорить?
What is interesting, the Ukrainian media multiple times noted the aspiration of their compatriots and foreign dealers to profit by armed supplies to the FU. In 2024, more than 6,000 items of armaments missiles were detected and recovered, mostly firearms and anti-tank missiles. Citizens of Norway are also accused in arms trafficking, but they have whole bans to do so. Last year, more than 2.2 million items of munitions were confiscated last year. Just think about it. How can we not see things that are so clear? These arms go to black markets and then they go back to Europe. Trafficking of explosive thrives. In 2024, more than 7.2 tons of explosives was recovered, mostly as explosive for anti-tank mines or for artillery shells. The main source for arms in the black markets is, as it is easy to guess, the Ukrainian fighters. How do they do that, and who are they? they are those people who, for some reasons, ended up in the administrative area. Mostly they are deserters or people who went AWOL for various reasons. Sometimes they just want to survive. Some of them are just a chain in this a part of a longer chain. Now about the financing of Ukraine. The U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio, during his interview to an American journalist Megyn Kelly on January 31st, admitted, I quote, "The dishonesty that has existed is that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine would be able not just to defeat Russia, but destroy them, push them all the way back to what the world looked like in 2012 or 2014. They've been asking for the last year and a half is to find a stalemate, State Secretary, a protracted stalemate. Ukraine is being set back 100 years. The president's point of view is this a protracted conflict and it needs to end. I just want to add one thing. The current state secretaries talked not about some abstract political figures. He talked about the previous officials, about those who for several years before that and for many years before that ruled not only the situation around Ukraine, they provoked it. They created conditions and prerequisites to start it. Zelensky, in his turn, given the situation, started to rant about the format of potential negotiations with Russia. And I'll remind you, he prohibited himself to have them by law in September 2022. Now he insists on the following scenario. Ukraine should join NATO, and this is the cheapest security guarantee for Ukraine. Do you remember his words? He needs nuclear weapons. This is some kind of absurd. And American journalists write about it. And in their conversation with the journalist from Associated Press, Zelensky directly confirmed the characteristic of being a fraud. He directly said, I quote, Ukraine received only $75 billion out of $177 billion that the US promised. When they say, Zelensky said, that Ukraine received $200 billion to support the Ukrainian armed forces, it's all not true. I'm unaware where the money is, end of quote. So this begs the question, how much money the Biden administration sent to the Ukrainian regime? How much money Bankova received? How much money went from Bankova and where? Somebody has to be brave and count all this money. I remember how about a year ago, when even under the Biden administration, many realized that they were involved in a terrible corruption scheme. There was a check in the executive power in the US, some kind of an audit to find out how much and what assistance exactly, humanitarian, financial, was sent to Ukraine. I had a feeling that it ended with nothing. I remember European commissars who went to Kiev to find out where the assistance was, and to agree what the Ukrainian side has to say. But this only proved that there was no audit, and it is just a global corruption scheme that was implemented, worked out, and then implemented by the American ultra-liberals. We took note of the recently appeared in the media of words of Samantha Power, the director of the USAID director. She was the permanent representative of the US to the UN. She walked the UN corridors, as they said, and listened to the punk group that made stunts in Russia. And this agency, USAID, this was the agency that interfered into the into internal affairs of independent states. And in 2023, Samantha Power publicly boasted that she sent $15 billion to the Kiev regime. But why did she boast? By how much money she sent? She especially underlined, and I'm talking to those who do not know that, she especially underlined that she and her agency, USAID, sent in 2023 to the Kiev regime $15 billion in cash. These are the words of the representatives of a country, of the US, where when a person takes $100 from his pocket, he is being looked strangely by other people in the shop. And the guards are being called to ask why this person was paying in cash. Because mostly people pay by cards. And a person that represents a very top official in the USA publicly underlines that $15 billion was sent to the Kiev regime in cash. What does this mean? This is a one-way ticket. This money cannot be tracked or counted. No one knows where and when this money was spent. Even more, I remember that under the Biden administration, one of little requirements to the Zelensky regime from the US that allowed Zelensky to do everything he wanted. The only demand was some kind of an attempt, only an attempt to fight total corruption. Probably the fight against corruption was the cause they spent this money. Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. I remember these words. And it is clear where this money go and who receive these flows of finance aid from the West. Now about the developments those who did not want to think now suddenly start to see things clearly. The situation in the Ukrainian army is getting truly critical and sad. Negative trends, strengthening morale, false desertment rises. The leader of the Pirogov Volunteer Mobile Hospital, Gennady Dryzenko, said, I quote, one more time, it is the other side. We, he said, the Ukrainian representative, every sixth or seventh died. The sixth or seventh, it means 60 to 70%. Only at the end of 2024, Ukraine saw more than 114,000 cases of people who went going AWOL. The critical lack of personnel is mentioned by the Guardian as well. The treatment of the commanders towards the soldiers is illustrate very well the words of an American mercenary. He said the following: it was meant for the grinder, and the better officer just sent whoever he could get. This is a very sobering commentary. The CNN report more casualties among Americans and foreign mercenaries. According to CNN, 20 U.S. citizens are considered to be missed in action. Bodies of at least 5 Americans weren't evacuated from the battlefield. Experts say that more killed and missed in action, the so-called wild geese, that's how foreign mercenaries are called, is caused by the fact that they are sent to the most difficult parts of the front line where military experience is needed. Now we know how the Ukrainian citizens are sent to the front line. Earlier, the units where foreigners served were in reserve. We knew that they were used selectively. Now in the Kursk region, they are the most part of the Ukrainian forces. The concentration in the Kursk border area is the highest. There were a lot of questions about demands of the US President Trump about rare earths that he put forward before Zelensky. According to the press service of the White House on February the 3rd, Donald Trump announced huge progress in Russia-Ukraine issue. However, he did not specify what he meant. Earlier, he also made another statement. I tell you the direct quote: "We tell Ukraine that they have rare earths and we need guarantees. Trump said, demand guarantees on rare earths in any deal with Ukraine. I want Ukraine, in exchange of what we give to them, to give us rare earths." End of quote. All things considered, the US president took into account the readiness of Kiev to sell Ukraine by hammer to keep military and finance support by the US. He approached the conflict from the commercial point of view. The similar idea was expressed by Zelensky in the so-called victory plan in October 2024. He proposed partners to make a deal with Ukraine about joint defense of critical resources of Ukraine, joint investment and exploitation of Ukraine's economic potential. End of quote. What does this mean when we talk about the critical resources of the country? Rare earths, exactly, including uranium, titanium, lithium, and others. On February 4th, Zelensky hurried to persuade Washington that they are ready to do this together, and he thanked the US for their support. What Trump said resembles not only a deal, but rather an order. And Ukraine worked off this order. Americans wanted the natural resources of Ukraine. They saw them long ago, and now, without serious effort, they managed to appropriate agriculture. Now those who sponsor the Kiev regime. Look what remained there. Now they came for the resources. Something similar happened in history. During the World War II, when the former Soviet Ukraine was occupied, Nazis started to loot the Republican agriculture. Do you remember how they took cattle and black soil from the territory of Ukraine to Germany? We talked about it many times. And now all of this happens without any force, because the Kiev regime is prepared to do it voluntarily. We understand that because of that and because the statehood is destroyed, Ukraine is not going to do anything together with anybody. All of this was proposed simply to be taken so that the people in Bankova retain their power. All this hype resembles a white noise. We want to ask them, what belongs to Ukraine out of all these things? What is controlled by the Kiev regime? And what is not their territory anymore? But why should we do that? So that those who, including in Washington, who think and approach this issue from the commercial point of view, so that they understand that Zelensky doesn't have what he offers. But there's also war against monuments. Ukrainian Nazis are triggered by the monuments that still remained in Ukraine. They associate them with Russia. But who guards the historic memory? Who defends the memory of the heroes of the Great Patriotic War and World War II? Of course, Russia and its citizens. This time, Ukrainian Nazis desecrated the memorial in honor of outstanding Russian figures, to the poets of Alexander Pushkin, to painter Mikhail Vruble, mathematician Alexander Lipunov, and physiologist Ivan Sechenov. These monuments weren't tolerated. On January 27, the Kiev demolished a memorial to an outstanding Russian and Soviet physiologist, Nobel Prize winner Ivan Pavlov. They had to explain their decision somehow, and Kiev said, I quote, "Despite the Pavlov's contribution to science, his figure is linked to the imperial narrative," as he said. I'll remind you, to those people who know nothing, when they tell that UK-Ukrainian partnership dates back thousands of years. So Ivan Pavlov is a world-renowned scientist. He was recognized as the oldest physiologist in the world. There's no figure that can be compared to him in Ukraine now, and what they did to his monument testifies to total lack of trained reflexes of those who lead the authorities in Kiev. They don't have a soul. They even don't have reflexes. You know, the absurdity of the situation is this. They demolished the monument to Pavlov, but his scientific contribution remained, and future generations will use his contribution. His works are in demand. But what are they going to do in the future? Are they going to rename Pavlov? Are they going to omit his name? The one who talked about reflexes? Do you know how this can be called? One way or another. Such things are commonplace. This is a motto of the Kiev regime. These facts and many of those that we're going to talk about today reconfirms the relevance of the special military operation to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine and to remove threats coming from its territory. All of these aims will be achieved.
And by the way, speaking about love and hate towards the Iranian citizens, from the information point of view, it has become like an information bomb. I'm talking about the publication on the official website of the Finnish Foreign Ministry for volunteers who plan to go to Ukraine, and this piece of information was published for the Finnish citizens. We noticed that this information was published on February 3rd, and I quote, that this information is for those planning or considering traveling to Ukraine to serve as volunteer fighters and for their family and friends. So it's clear. But yet they're still publishing it. I won't be surprised if several persons got fired after the incident that took place there. In that materials, the Finnish Foreign Ministry has made a reservation that the Finnish Foreign Ministry does not recommend or promote volunteering as a fighter. But at the same time, it provides the Finnish society the steps that should be taken to do so in the right way. It's like as if they publish a guide how to commit a suicide, and they will write a reservation that, well, suicide is a bad thing to do, but if you want to commit a suicide, here is an instruction for you with the following steps. It's not our problem. Questions should be posed to them. How are they going to live with that? This document, well, I cannot even call it a document. It is just a mere paper that provides detailed information for Finnish mercenaries. It provides information what sources should be used to get information, what Finnish legislation says about such voyages, and they just remind us, just in case, that the war has its own rules. This instruction also provides information on how to sign a contract with the Ukrainian armed forces and opportunities to acquire military equipment and how to get medical treatment if soldiers are wounded. It's quite a detailed guide for the Finnish citizens how to die. I'm quite sure that materials will be published, and I'm sure that the diplomats at the Finnish Foreign Ministry will say that they won't do that. The Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb has repeatedly said and stated his intent to support Ukraine as long as it's necessary, and that he appreciates that the decisions of all those to go to Ukraine as volunteers. It was just a political put-up job that was sent to the Finnish Foreign Ministry from the higher-ups. And it shows the extreme state of Russophobic obsession of the Finnish officials, including its diplomatic service. They provoke their own citizens to go for dangerous and criminal schemes. Just remember what George Bush Jr. said when he was speaking with the representatives of the Kiev regime. It was his video, his words. He stated that American political elites have high hopes for the Kiev regime, because the task of the Kiev regime is to kill as many Russians as possible. Well, Finland has decided to go further. If American elites are saying that the task of the Kiev regime to kill as many Russians as possible, they mean that they need to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, because the war is being waged until the last Ukrainian. Well, the Finland has decided to sit out here as well, because the task is quite clear, which is to kill as many Finnish citizens as possible, because they have this instruction on the official website. We would like to note that we are aware of the involvement of foreign, including Finnish mercenaries in military activities in Ukraine on the side of the Kiev neo-Nazi regime, and we don't envy their fate. All those who plan to try to cause damage to our country during the special military operation, we would strongly recommend to read the very document of the Finnish Foreign Ministry that I've been talking about all this time. It is a quote from their document. Please figure out all your problems and issues on your homeland in Finland, in case if you will get home later, or if you won't go back at all. That clause should be carefully read and should be learned by heart. And another use of hatred. The International Ice Hockey Federation has made a decision not to admit the Russian national team to take part in the World Championship 2026. And now they're explaining their decision with their inability and the lack of possibility to guarantee the safety of the Russian team during the upcoming tournament, given the special military operation. We believe that it's just an attempt to get rid of fair competition and to deprive the audience of enjoying the game played by one of the best hockey teams in the world. What does it mean they cannot ensure the safety of the Russian team? If you can't do that, then don't organize a tournament. Don't organize anything. It's your responsibility. Safety is a responsibility. It's not an option. And if you cannot deal with that, then you should not be an organizer of world championships. There are countries who are unable to ensure the logistics, who are unable to provide comfortable conditions for the game, or they cannot guarantee the proper accommodation for audience, and they are not doing that. Well, and that fact is being checked by different commissions that have sports officials and who are trying to make a decision, like, for example, that the tournament should be moved to another part of the world, to another country. We understand that these are just mere excuses, and I would like to underscore that, and as it was repeatedly been stated at many levels that Russia is able to ensure its own security and the safety of its own people. That's what we are doing in the special military operation in its part. As for the World Championship, our athletes are ready and they are not afraid of taking part in international tournaments. And what they are doing is hypocrisy and cowardice. It's a violation of all principles of international sports movement, and we wish the International Ice Hockey Federation to get their courage up and to admit that the attempts to cancel the Russian sports will fail. We will continue to consistently advocate the development of international sports cooperation, the basis of principles of equality and non-discrimination, and to ensure an equal access to sports competitions for everyone with no exception. It reminds me of segregation in the Western countries when people with different colors of their skin were banned from visiting educational facilities because their safety was not guaranteed. Well, they should have probably admit their monstrous nature, because it means that those who are supporting are dangerous, and you cannot ensure the safety of participants. Germany will soon hold parliamentary elections on February 23rd. Well, these are all coincidence, and we shouldn't be accused of the elections and how they're being organized. The elections had to be called after the collapse of the Olaf Scholz coalition government in November 2024, and political parties that were part of the coalition government failed to agree on the principled issues of the German domestic and foreign policy, including the issue on how to fund the substantive costs of Berlin and the support of the Kiev regime. And it's quite telling that right after the collapse of the German government, the Federal Minister of Home Affairs of Germany, Nancy Faeser, has quickly made a preposterous statement on the imminent Russian interference in the German parliamentary elections, while she believes that we have nothing to do. Why has she said that? Well, her objective was clear. Her remarks launched another campaign to intimidate the electorate with the imaginary Russian threat. And as the day of elections approaches, this campaign is becoming more and more powerful in Germany. The security services of Germany are eagerly reporting about the establishment of the special interagency groups and commissions. They are preparing to protect their country from the ubiquitous Moscow hackers, internet trolls, bots, and influence agents. It is natural that the necessary funds and budgets are being allocated for these purposes. They can write whatever they want, that they neutralized 15 quadrillions of bots, that they have suspended the activities of 2.5 trillions of someone, something, well, any word. They can write down any word, trolls, like whatever, because information cannot be checked, you know. There is a phrase: it is difficult to look for a black cat in a dark room if a black cat isn't there, but when substantive amount of money is being allocated for that, why not? The largest companies have left Germany. The largest German companies have left Germany. Well, they have nothing to do but to look for Russian hackers. By propagating this anti-Russian myth, the German authorities are turning a blind eye to the attempts to influence their electoral race. Just look how the United States don't even conceal their attempts to interfere into their elections. Well, I believe that's the German hobby, not to see the obvious thing. So if they believe that Americans have liberated Europe from the Nazis, Germany, they are saying that Germany was invaded by Nazis that came from somewhere from the east, and then the Americans came from the west and liberated Germany from the Nazis. That's what we have been hearing from them all this time. We have learned from certain Western media information that some EU countries seek to include restrictions on the freedom of movement and period of stay of Russian diplomats in the next package of anti-Russian sanctions. We have no doubt about the accuracy of this information that is reflected in some articles, and we have a serious attitude towards them, and we guarantee if such measures are taken, we will immediately take measures against diplomats of EU countries and the Russian Federation, and these restrictions will be proportionate. And these actions will be taken if measures will be taken against the Russian diplomats working in EU countries. The French internet sphere and blogs are actively writing about the fact that Russia has expelled a French correspondent of Le Monde media outlet. No, this journalist wasn't expelled without any reason. Well, probably something went wrong, but it's not true. It's not the case. A journalist of Komsomolskaya Pravda, an international journalist, had all the necessary documents, and he was going to go to France to work there, and France denied him an opportunity to work in France as an international correspondent. His visa was denied, and they stated if we warned that if discriminatory action will be taken against journalists, we'll take the same actions against French journalists that are working freely in our countries. There are a lot of actually French journalists working in our countries that they have visas and accreditations. They are present at many information events. No measures, no discriminatory measures are taken against them. And we have appealed so many times to the French embassy in Moscow with an offer to not make journalists hostages to the Russophobic policy. We have appealed through the Russian embassy in Paris to the French foreign ministry. We had negotiations and talks with the French diplomats, and we've sent all the relevant notes with a view to find some mutually acceptable solution to that. And we warned that the responsive relevant measures will be taken with regard to the French journalists if they will ask for a visa. There wasn't any political context in our decision. It was just this decision was taken from the logical point of view. The French authorities have escalated the situation. They haven't issued a visa despite the numerous requests of the Russian side to the journalist of the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper, and we have been trying to solve this issue for months. All these talks and negotiations have been going on for months, and all our attempts to address the situation after it had become obvious that the situation cannot be solved, we have taken measures against the Le Monde journalist who was next to receive the Russian visa, and we have taken the responsive measures with regard to the French journalist. So I'm just following up on the topic. If measures are taken against Russian journalists, the same proportionate actions will be taken against diplomats working in our country. We have received a lot of questions due to the shocking information that has emerged with regard to the United States Agency for International Agency. I have no idea how this agency is going to be called in the future, because in the past it was known as USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, and well, it should be called as an agency for interference in domestic affairs of other states. That's how it should be called, taking into account what this agency has been really doing all this time. Russia has been talking a lot about this agency, and I remember that in 2012 this agency was expelled from our country, and we have made a detailed commentary on that because their activities had nothing to do with the real operations that they have been carrying out in our country. But our commentary doesn't reflect what this agency has actually been doing all this time all over the globe. This information about the agency emerges every day. We receive so many facts about it. It's a state agency which positioned itself for the past 20 years as a soft power agency.
And now it turns out that the Americans themselves want to not just use the light power, but something much more powerful towards this very same agency. So when the aid was frozen by the key operators, the USAID, as well as the issues that came to light during the audit of the actions of this, and it seems that the taxpayers' money were not allocated to the projects in the humanitarian aid direction, which was stated initially. But actually, all this money, those were hundreds of millions, were allocated towards the initiatives not of questionable character. For example, to stage a transgender opera in Colombia, or to provide organs for different people, and those were also reproductive organs. But it seems, and it appears right now, the world found out, as it's been discussed even abroad, that the USAID directly sponsored the so-called Velvet Revolutions and the coup d'etat in the countries of the post-Soviet space, in Georgia and Kyrgyzia, in Ukraine, and they used funds and grants of non-governmental organizations. They infiltrated and influenced the economies and governments of many countries of the world. We've talked about it over the years, and as a response, we've only heard that this is not true, this is Russian propaganda. But apparently, Russian propaganda is spreading the truth. Everything turned out to be true. American taxpayers paid out of their pocket the destruction of the Ukrainian statehood. They sponsored the coming to power of the Nazi clique of Turchinov, of Poroshenko, and now Zelensky. And now, even if the state servicemen, of course they lied to the U.S. Congress, trying to convince that the Banderites are so-called Democrats, or the democratic powers, then explaining the USAID support of Al-Qaeda only in the years following the 9/11 attack in New York and Manhattan, at the same time where American soldiers died at the hands of Al-Qaeda, is impossible. But it is a fact. And this part was quite a revelation to me. Right now, the ongoing investigation of the whole administrative operation is open to a foreign leadership. And during this transformation of this corrupted, that has sunk deep in the opposite ideas and narratives of this organ, but it's actually a key element of America's interference in the internal affairs of other countries. We operate based on the fact that this structure should not have been created, not when it comes to both international principles but also moral principles of the humanity as a whole. We continue to witness this insane process, which is nothing but the revelation of the truth of what the agency truly tackled. And of course, as a shock to everyone, came the information that the USAID sponsored through grants the mass media, demanding that they conduct a policy of strategic silence when it comes to the issues that are not of particular interest for the White House, that are uncomfortable for the White House. When it comes to the issues that should have made someone believe in something, everyone was trying to shed a light on them. But other, more important topical issues, especially for the American society, for American taxpayers, for American citizens, were being conveniently left out in American mass media. Just one example, situation in Bucha, which is nothing but a stage situation. And even international organizations admitted it, but they're staying silent on it. This situation was total sensation. It didn't leave the articles. And it was discussed in America, in NATO, and in other countries. And of course, it rang in other countries as well, only to blame Russia for something we've never done. And let's take a look at Ruska Porechna. Footage, photographs, dead bodies, medical experts, analysis, and not just using sources, but direct, honest interviews taken through tears with medical experts who we should give them their flowers for their courage, for speaking of what they've seen when they took a look at the victims of the Kiev regime. And do you see how the mainstream media, USAID, pressed the button called strategic silence? Another subject from these subjects. We've talked about the American digital informations in order to invoke censure, in order to preserve technological presence. And all this happens against the backdrop of the so-called spike big tech, of these grand technological corporations and the special services of the U.S. competitors and the competence of American authorities and the monopoly, despite the sentences of the free market, are not being tolerated. They are not allowed to exist. Under different pretexts, they're either eradicated or they're introducing unilateral sanctions against them. They're bringing them to bankruptcy. They're pressuring them by several restrictions, legal cases, trying to bury them in litigation, or they're just holding them hostage, as it happened to the affiliate of Huawei, who was held for months on house arrest just for the fact that she's the daughter of the leader of the largest Chinese corporation. And a similar choice was made to the most dynamically developing digital platform on an American market. His number of users surpasses 170 million. It's the service of short videos, TikTok. And here, together with the desire to deal with a competitor, there is another anti-Chinese policy, which is nothing but mass hysteria that is being led in the States. And allow me to shed a light on history. In April 2024, the U.S. introduced a law according to which the country, for safety reasons, and apparently the U.S. is trying to explain everything by this phrase, they should prohibit the work of a popular network, TikTok, if the Chinese company does not send this platform to the American company. And the deadline was set for January 19th. And by then, the situation hadn't changed. TikTok was blocked, but only for 24 hours, because Donald Trump, immediately after taking office, the next day has postponed this decision for 90 days. And now the president who restored the work of this platform is trying to pose himself as the savior, as the someone who campaigns for the freedom of speech, who's trying to defend the interests of its users. But of course, there is always a different explanation, a condition where TikTok is allowed to stay in the American market if they give at least 50% of their shares to the investors from the U.S. I am at a loss for words at how best to describe this situation. Either to bring up the investment climate or just to say this is horrible. No matter what public rhetoric Washington tries to follow, they try to take the course in order to restore the monopoly in the digital informational space. And in order to do that, they're trying to take all the leading world online platforms under their control, which is why their measures, their style could differ, but they share the same goal: to keep the reins of control on the public opinion. And how all of this correlates with the amendment of freedom of speech in the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees. I have no idea. But as for the good news, in Bahrain on the 27th January, there was the ceremony of the opening of the International Cultural Humanitarian Project, Russian Seasons, Symphony Orchestra of Marian Theater, led by Valery Georgiev, presented the